What's that? Okay. Okay. Testing, testing. Can you hear me? Good morning, everyone. Um, Welcome to this session on climate and psychology and eco-anxiety. We spend so much time here in Davos talking about climate from an economic lens, from a policy lens, but it's great to dig into some of the psychology factors that are shaping how we respond to this crisis. This panel is presented by the Free Thinkers Society, which is a new organization that supports thinking on the edge. There are so many ways that climate and psychology intersect. I think about climate anxiety, mental health problems that are caused by climate change, climate disasters. But there are also other questions about how we respond to it that are very much linked to psychology. There's this great quote that in a paper that LaDonna Edwards, who really spearheaded this session, sent over from, the quote is from James Hillman. Psychology so dedicated to awakening human consciousness needs to wake itself up to one of the most ancient human truths. We cannot be studied or cured apart from the planet. So we're going to talk about the connection between psychology, the planet, and humans. I just want to go down just to sort of set the stage and have everyone introduce themselves. I should say I'm Justin Warland. I'm a senior correspondent at Time, where I write about climate. And sort of, did the mic just turn on? Okay. Well, I hope everyone heard everything prior to that. I'm not going to repeat it. And I come to this, sort of dealing with my own version of eco-anxiety, seeing these things play out, and trying to find the way to sort of keep going in the midst of all that. So we'll just go along the line and have everyone sort of introduce themselves with their sort of affiliation, but also just to give a little bit of texture about how you come to these questions of psychology and climate.
Morning, everybody. I'm Dr. Deborah Brosnan. I am a marine scientist, climate scientist, founder of OceanShot, which is focusing on I don't want to give you a scientific perspective here. I want to tell you how I came to this field. I grew up in the west of Ireland and spent all of my time in the ocean. And my curiosity and that love of the ocean made me a scientist. When I really realized the power of nature was after surviving a jetliner crash coming back from Asia to LA. And everybody was advising me to go to psychiatrist, psychologist. And I thought, no, I'm going to go to the ocean. And that's exactly what I did. I took myself to the sea. I went in the ocean. I walked on the beach. I spent a month doing that. And then I processed what happened and came back to the world. And that was the most powerful healing. It was also the cheapest. And that really got me interested in how do we take all of our scientific knowledge that I've been studying, how do we take our human connection, not just to healing ourselves and deepening our connection with nature, but how do we take that into every aspect of our lives and business? Because we can. We really can. And I think that's what we're going to talk about.
Absolutely. It's great.
My name is David Erritzoe. I'm a psychiatrist and neuroscientist. I work in London at Imperial College, where I'm sort of director in the Center for Psychedelic Research, but also generally psychopharmacological research. So we do a lot of brain imaging and mental health studies, where we study different compounds, mainly psychedelics, over the last couple of decades for different mental health conditions. And where this taps into the current theme of nature is that it's a fascinating, quite a lot more holistic and experience-driven mental health treatment model that is coming to hit the mental health space more and more over the next years and be licensed most likely within a few years. And what we see, among many other things, is that part of the experience is a profound relation, connection to nature as part of these experiences. And that both speaks to to the experiential component of this treatment, but also how some of those additional effects that they have beyond the direct improvements of different mental health conditions also actually relates to your sense of belonging and connection with nature and how that plays in. So that's part of our research program, but among other things in mental health. So yeah.
Hi, I'm Leo Rosman. Can you hear me? Yes. And I'm a senior lecturer, and I'm also a psychedelic researcher in the University of Exeter, and where I teach also a master's in psychedelics. And one of the themes that I really interested in psychedelics is the theme of connectedness in general. So I recognize the illness in society as relates to alienation, oppression, some socio-political, economical structures, and this is part of the kind of, it's in nature, but it's in connectedness in general. And I see psychedelics and mental health as relates to the theme of connectedness. And this is something that I explore in different directions, both nature connectedness, but also social connectedness and belonging and community work. I'm also the founder of Ripples, which is a nonprofit dedicated to peace work with psychedelics. I work with Israelis and Palestinians to do peace rituals with psychedelics. So I'm a peace activist as well. And yeah, that's it.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Hooper. I'm the CEO of the Institute for Sustainability Leadership in Cambridge. And I'm the least qualified person on this panel to talk about this topic. I'm here because over the last 30 years, we've worked with over 40,000 senior leaders, predominantly from business, from finance, from government. And as part of university, of course, what we do through education and convening is very much focused on a lot of the rational drivers, the scientific case for action, the economic case for action, which are very compelling, but it will usually always be the human drivers of change that we need to engage with and that are, I suppose, under the radar, things that we need to think about within our work. And broadly speaking, most of the people we work with care very deeply but are trapped in a broken system, recognize that we will need changes at the level of state action, international governance, shifts to markets, but those changes won't happen unless individuals find ways to drive and influence those changes. And with apologies for not only being the least qualified, I'm also the most time-pressed and need to leave after only 25 minutes, so apologies.
Well, thank you for that, and maybe I'll come to you first, but I want to frame this sort of question for everyone, and then we'll start with you, Lindsay, but this question of, what is it about human psychology that makes it hard for us to take action on climate? And, Lindsay, I'd ask in particular, what is it for leaders that makes it hard for them to take action on climate when it comes to human psychology?
So maybe if I start with the positives, and over the past, I suppose, decade, we have seen incredible positive momentum towards more leaders engaging with, talking about issues around nature, inequality, climate change. And there are a whole range of human drivers there. They might claim that it's around the economics, but it's around fear. There's been this shift in sentiment, so fear of being left behind, not being current, fear for the future, fear for children, often a sense of wanting to be part of something, a sense of purpose. It can be status enhancing. Is this an agenda on which you can win? But where we see finding it difficult, I think there are some psychological issues, but it's often, as I said, being trapped in a system in which incentives are rewarding something very different. So wanting to do something, but actually being punished in the markets, in their careers, by doing something that is countercultural, that is counter profits. So the challenges are working in ways that are counter to what all of the system is rewarding you for. There's a lot of fear now that there's been backlash, now that sentiment has shifted. There's genuine fear of public attack, of cancellation as being seen as naive, irrelevant. It's, the trend, the hype bubble has moved on and it's AI. Are you current? There's a lot of pessimism. There's a lot of fear that actually, do we believe in credible pathways anymore? I've been in a lot of pessimistic conversations this week. Do we believe there is any momentum for the kind of change we need? Or do we now just move into accepting we're not going to change and we need to adapt? So I think it's really hard if you can't see and don't believe that there's any pathway forward. That's a real challenge. And there's also exhaustion from those people that have been trying for a long time and can see that things are getting worse and going backwards. Then how do you believe, especially when you're just being told, be courageous, but if you have no credible pathway forward that you can believe in, then that's a really challenging space to be in.
So I hear fear, pessimism, exhaustion. I wonder if others might come in on this question of the psychological factors that are making it difficult for it doesn't have to just be leaders, but for anyone to take action.
Well, I'll jump in. Excuse me. I would echo a lot of what you're saying in the sense of, I do think people are exhausted. I think are concerned because the situation seems to be getting worse, and there's a lot of focus on what's getting worse and not very much focus on what's getting better or where. I think part of the reason that we're seeing this is because, like you said, we're not providing enough incentives, we're not providing enough rewards, but nor are we. A lot of our conversations happen with leaders in the same room talking about the same topics that they're all related to. And we're asking them to sit together and come up with a model and with a way of moving forward when they've never been in that world. And so if you go to many meetings, even around here, you'll find investors in one room. You'll find people focusing on nature in another. And rarely do you find them in the same room saying, what is our shared purpose and what can we do together? And I think that we've got to change the people in the room. We've got to change the mix in the room. The second is we've got to get people out in nature talking about nature, because it's very hard to relate to climate change. When I say climate change, you don't feel it here, right? You think, whoa, climate change. It's happening, what do I do? But if I say to you, a beautiful wave, if I say to you, the forest, and then we talk about how important the forest is to us as a society, to our well-being, to our future, that makes sense to you. So I think reframing the conversation of climate change about what resonates with us and taking that resonance into the business world to integrate it, not to make it separate.
That's great, and I would ask the same question, to you both, especially rooted in some of your academic work in this area, but also maybe if you can zoom in on this important point that Deborah made about nature and the disconnect perhaps that many people have from nature, if that is reflective of of your view. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways of, in a way, approaching and seeing the clear evidence of an increasing disconnect from nature over the last many, many years. I mean, examples are that more and more people are moving away from nature into urban spaces. Also, when people are, not something we have done, but looking into how nature is represented in media and books and film, even Disney. If you examine the content of nature, real sort of wild nature, complex nature, scenery in Disney has gone down over the years. So even the exposure through media such as that to children has gone down over the years. It's more and more sort of human-created spaces that people are exposed to. So that's sort of one angle to see how we are getting increasingly disconnected from nature. And to Deborah's the last part of Deborah's point, I think that's the core of it. I think it's about feeling and experiencing. You can, on a rational level, you can bring people together and still it will be on a rational level. If you can make people feel and experience, a bit similar to mental health. If you have people in power and decision-making positions, leadership, that have mental health very, very close and actually have, it might not be themselves, but close ones, and by the way, most people have, if they really engage in that and really feel it, engagement in that, that will make things happen on a more profound and powerful level than from people being in rooms and discussing things on a more rational level. Everybody can agree that it's important to do something with mental health, or that nature is nice and joyful, but there's a difference between feeling that you feel joy from nature and then actually feeling you are nature or you are part of nature. So I think bringing it really close in, and that is some of what we are working with and what we can see happens through different approaches. Actually spending time in nature is obviously the most obvious one, in a way the most logical one, and that works. But you can also do it through other measures, including some of the stuff we are working with.
Yeah, I'll add it with psychedelics. When people do psychedelics in nature, there's a feeling as nature becomes alive. So it's like an immanent quality of nature, a spirit quality of nature. And then people feel a certain relation to nature, which is different than our regular ways of feeling it. It was almost part of nature, right? So if you think about indigenous cultures that use ayahuasca, there's a cosmology of animism in which anything in nature has its spirit, and they relate to nature in that way. So there's not much difference between culture and nature, and humans and nature. That dichotomy is unified in a way when we enter those relations with nature, and then we see nature as part of our culture in a way. And they have in some tribes they have a concept of Aini. Aini is a concept of mental health, in which mental health is an environmental thing. So it's a relational aspect of reality. And when we think about mental health as something like this, that is in relation to our environment, community, and so on, we might think about also nature and our relation to nature and how we treat nature in a different way. And for those indigenous people, it's really part of their cosmology, ways of being in the world, and they feel it on an embodied emotional way. And I would like to maybe also add that to that lack of hope and vision and the kind of the despair and passivity that exists in the system is like what prevents creation of a movement. Because we think about individuals, each individual, no matter how much they feel belong to nature or how much they want to change things, they come back to this reality and they don't know what to do with it, right? Because the structure is so strong. So the emergence of a movement is what is really needed. XR was maybe close to that as a rebellious movement, but it could be any movement that attracts a lot of people with a shared vision, right? And that the psychology of what prevent the movement from being created, what splits communities from collectivizing themselves with a shared mission. I think that is also something that is embedded in the system and is oppressive in the system. And when systems are oppressive, a laziness is developed after time as a kind of what can we do? And we're just used to that. We cannot really do anything differently.
So I want to come back to some of those things, but I want to go to Lindsay just before she has to leave to talk a little bit about how you break through some of these challenges with the work you do and how you break through some of these challenges for business leaders in particular.
Sure, and I agree with this point about the need for a movement. I think there's a very real... So when I first started out working this space, Jürgen Randers, who you may know, he was Club of Rome, talked about a future scenario for his children and grandchildren. He said they'll just live in a tech bubble. They'll never go outside, and it kind of won't matter that nature's crashed because they'll be, part of the elite living in a tech bubble, and it will all be simulated, and they'll experience nature only through screens, and that will be fine. And that felt very far-fetched, but right now that feels relatively realistic if we don't make change. I think we have recognized that we won't get the level of action we need, which will require governments to act and act collectively without this becoming a popular issue, and in some places a populist issue, to go beyond it being a concern of just global elites, indigenous communities, campaigning NGOs, scientists. This needs to be something that societies more broadly care about, and that requires us, as we're starting to do now, with some businesses, those that have a huge audience, those that have a huge consumer base, but also with a whole range of disciplines, including those represented here, behavioral economics, anthropology, a whole range of human and social sciences, media, creative sectors, those that are incredibly effective at influencing change and engaging across society. I think we need to find ways to have much wider engagement, understanding, valuing, recognition of nature, so it becomes a popular concern, not just an elite or an indigenous imperative.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to pull on thread. I mean, and just sort of, if anyone wants to sort of build off of Lior's point, I mean, he touched on a lot there, but others who, if you have something to add or contribute on that question of how do we break past some of these challenges.
Yeah, I really did. I liked that comment, and I think it's almost like we're all convening on that idea of really getting a diverse group of people together that are, because we are all connected by nature. I mean, let's face it, that is the one thread that unites us and has through time. And getting people together around that from diverse groups. The question is, what do we do when we get people together? How do we then decide, how do we start to take action? If we know that nature is really important, and nature is in effect the foundation of how we will solve a lot of the climate crisis, what actions do we take collectively as a group from different sectors? I think we've got to turn this movement into action that affects our businesses, that affects our daily lives, that bring us the kind of like peace that we're looking for. And I do see this both in people, I see it in companies, I see it in governments. There is this almost search, this urgency for a peace and a sense of safety on the planet. Very few of us feel safe living on planet Earth right now. And I don't know if there's ever been a time when we've had this feeling of being so disconnected we don't feel safe in our own home, so to speak. And so bringing us together to create the necessary steps for safety, I think is really key.
I might ask, since we've been speaking so much about creating movements, and of course nature is in some ways a means to connect with our shared humanity, but I guess I'm wondering if I'm sitting here as an individual who thinks, well, how do I individually reconnect with nature, perhaps in order to better be a part of the broader movement? What would you say to someone who's thinking through that lens as an individual? What are some of the practices to perhaps best facilitate a reconnection with nature, and then also more action on climate?
So just answering from my perspective, and I think there's a really interesting perspective coming in here too at the psychedelics. I think the most fundamental thing is to get out in nature. And it doesn't have to be some remote place. I mean, literally getting out your door every day. You live in DC, I live in DC part of the year. There are places to go and to walk in nature, and just literally getting out is the first step. And I think the second is actually talking to people, going out in nature with your community and having discussions around it. These sound very simple and simplistic, but how often do you do them? That's the question. How often do you get out and walk in nature?
Well, I think I'd say this. I think that you make a very good point, and oftentimes people, myself included, are dismissive of nature in an urban environment. Actually, there's a lot of places in DC to walk, and I frankly don't do that often. I do, I'm here. I'll take Friday afternoon and spend some time outdoors here, and then I'll do it when I'm from California. When I'm in California, I'll do it there. But really, we should find ways to engage with nature on a more daily basis and not dismiss the nature in our backyard. That was a long answer to your question, but the short answer is not often in DC. Yeah.
I guess Leah and I, we are lucky that our wonderful hosts that have invited us to Davos, they're hosting us up on the mountain. So and the car got stuck, so couldn't get us. So we get in nature while we're here by walking up and down to that wonderful cabin. I think maybe to bring it a bit to mental health in sense of how can we on an individual level connect to nature. I'll take it one step back first and in a way try to quickly establish that there's a really, really well-evidenced relationship between nature relatedness, nature connectedness, and mental health that has been evidenced even in hundreds of millions of people in studies around the world for all countries, that there's a direct relationship between different positive mental health measures and the connection to nature and that direct relationship. You can also see it in urban environments, people who live in cities, the more they are close to green spots and the more time they go through them, directly related to nature. And it has even in some neuroscience studies impact on your brain's handling of stress, so positive impact on your neuro response to stress if you are more exposed to nature, even in an urban environment. So then the million-dollar question, I guess, is how do we then make people more connected to nature? Because before people go into a negotiation, into a room to meet others, I think if you can make people more connected before they go in, then you can make probably even greater change than just bring people together. And obviously we are very biased, me and Leo, because we work with these compounds, and it's not to say psychedelics are the solution to everything, but they kind of are. No, they're not. But they seem to really have incredible promise in all the trials. We have brought them back, did the first trials in modern time. So since the 50s, 60s, in mental health, in depression, we have then taken it to anorexia nervosa, to chronic pain. Now we are launching in addiction. And part of the aspect about being addicted to something, whether it's a behavioral thing like gambling or a substance, is that your whole reward system is being hijacked towards the appreciation of this salient thing you are addicted to. And what we can see with the psychedelics is that and what we are testing now in new trials, both in opiate addiction and gambling addiction, is whether these interventions, this experiential treatment modality, is rebroadening people. So taking them away from the hijack space and rebroadening their reward spectrum. And part of our way of examining that will be to put in, as part of other natural rewards, such as food, social connection, but also put in nature into the MRI brain scanner that we are going to examine these people before and after they undergo a psychedelic therapy. So we are going to tap directly into that aspects in these upcoming trials. And I will also say that a direct relationship between nature connectedness is playing out into direct relationships with nature relatedness, connectedness, and kindness, empathic concern, altruistic concern, and pro-social behaviors, agreeableness as a trait, and so on. So there's so much to gain by increasing nature connectedness. And what we see in trials, even people sitting in a relatively clinical, boring room, is an increase in nature relatedness in all trials. Also, when we do global surveys, we see the same thing. We see increased nature relatedness after psychedelic exposure. We see the more people are exposed to it, the more they're close to nature. We see even years after exposure to psychedelics that people are still more feel part of nature. And you can speak more to maybe the connectedness aspect and the ego thing and all that is mediating some of that. Maybe, I don't know, you can speak about whatever you want.
I will.
We have been working together for 10 years, so.
And when we share the bed as well.
We share the bed. Up on the mountain.
Yeah, so I think what I again, I'm interested in connectedness in general, right? And in order to enter a state of relations, so it's not just about being in nature and going out to nature, but it's also how to enter a state of relation with nature that has a certain quality. So I like Martin Buber, who speaks about I-thou relationships. So all relations have these two qualities, I-it and I-thou. I-it is like the relationship of use, the transactional, with things, with people, with nature. This is natural. This is all we do. We all do that. It's part of relations. And there are I-thou relations, which is more the kind of spirit in the relation. It's the kind of quality of relation that fills us with life energy, right? So a dialogue can have a quality in it that is profound and fills us, and we enjoy it. And the same with nature. We can enter I-thou relations with nature. To do that, the basic thing to enter I-thou relations with anything is to cultivate presence. And I think if we go to nature, but our phone is open and we're bothered by work and we want to take photos all the time, then we're not really in relation with nature in that quality, right? We're not really part of nature or connected to nature in the same quality. And so I think even if going out to nature, it's like how to cultivate presence in the moment, put the phone on flight mode, or maybe even don't take it, or any other practice that helps you to cultivate presence in order to enter healthy relations. And with psychedelics, I used to take people on. Before I was a scientist, I think I was a psychedelic tour guide. I used to take people on tours, on walks in nature, hiking in natures, with a bit of LSD. And
You did that for me. You did that.
And definitely the relation with nature was full of presence and life and joy between people, and it felt a profound thing. And yeah, just some practices from ecotherapy might be relevant, of like also walking in nature in silence, in quiet. I've been doing once awe walk. So you walk and you almost try to cultivate the feeling of awe, right? So you can go next to a tree and you look up at the tree and you like open your mouth. You almost like act as if you're in awe. And you just like, you feel in the nature, you summon the awe from nature in the moment. So there are a few practices from ecotherapy can be also used and cultivated in building those relations.
So I want to just follow up very quickly. So I mean, I can, we can all take this advice about how to engage better with nature, both spending more time, getting rid of this sort of transactional approach. That's something that's easy to apply. Psychedelics, I think, can be intimidating for some people. So I just wonder if if you're suggesting that as an option to consider. Like, how do you suggest people actually concretely engage with that? Is there something people should read to guide? Do they need to find you to lead the tour? I mean, what's your advice?
Yeah, that's my next job.
I mean that concretely as a question. I mean, let's answer it.
I mean, how people can. I mean, obviously now I speak with a mental health psychiatrist hat on, and not on a tour with Leo. But in a way, they are on their way into the mental health space, right? They're on their way to be licensed as treatment modalities, and as they do, they will be rescheduled also sort of on a global level in different systems that will make probably different legal structures, relax them, and therefore also in a way get people who might not be suffer for severe mental illness get more easy access to some of these experiences. And they can be incredibly beautiful to do in groups and in nature, which is not how it's going to be in conventional mental health in the health systems. But that will probably be more and more of that. There's already more and more of that because the psychedelic business and retreat is a very increasing space, and I think there will be more of that, and people might seek that more. And the whole communitas is very strong when people do these things together. In the more clinical space, so we, as an example, have created a couple of clinical treatment spaces in London where we do these trials, and because of a few aspects of these compounds, they make people extremely sensitive to context, to the environment you're in, and to the interactions with the therapist and the people in the room. So we are in a way, and I think that is a positive sort of extra outcome of these treatment modalities entering health, is that the spaces, the clinical spaces, think about a lot of clinical spaces, how incredibly uninspiring, almost counterproductive they are, and particularly in the UK and the NHS, my goodness. But what we are doing is taking that very serious, the sensitivity to the environment, and actually bringing nature element as well into the space. Both think about design, arts, but also replacing some of the very artificial building materials in the clinical space. So you can still have hygienic spaces that you can use in a clinic that actually are nature. It could be stone faces and so on. And also bringing plants in, which is only doing something positive despite like kind of ridiculous kind of, oh, but what about bacteria in a plant? Yeah, but how many people are, unless you are really immunosuppressed, going to be in trouble from a plant in a room? Like, relax these things, make these spaces much more comforting, much more supportive, and then that will even enhance the impact of nature-relatedness and on the mental health outcomes in the people undergoing these treatments. So I think a sort of an extra element and positive aspect of these treatments will be that the spaces will be more sort of comforting, soothing aesthetic and appreciating it and bringing nature into the clinical spaces as well. And we have built some model clinics, a couple of clinical spaces that could be used as a model, and so have others to take that very serious.
I think to you that sounds like the modern office. I mean, creating a space that's not so sterile. And I think for sort of, I'm going to put a sort of more scientific hat on for a moment, but I think bringing it back to, like, even where do you have your meetings? We think it's just fine. Everybody walks in a room and you dress in business attire and you sit around a room and have a meeting. It must imply there's a seriousness to it. But the best meetings I've ever had is when I've said, okay, let's go walk. Everybody on that walk is creative. The flow of conversation, the flow of ideas, and the ability to reach a decision is much faster than when you're sitting around a room, even if you're writing on the walls. I think that's something we can do very simply. And the other, I think, is to give permission to leaders to engage in that kind of thinking. Because we've sort of taken away that permission from them and said, you have to be like this, you have to be in this kind of space to be a good leader and to be making proper decisions, when it's actually not how it is. And I'm going to give you a personal example as a scientist. I came to science through the ocean because I loved it, and we talked about that earlier. But as I went through my PhD, what I was trained to do is to take my person out of my science, because you want to be objective, you want to be open to being wrong, and you want to be as open-minded and as scientifically rigorous as you can. Now, that does not allow you to be emotional about your research, and that's fine. But at the end of a PhD, and maybe it's the end of an MBA training in the opposite way, there should be a class that says, now, how do you integrate who you were when you walked in the door with an absolute passion for the ocean with who you've become from your training? And we don't bring those two together. So you're out there on your own trying to figure out, what hat am I wearing? How do I sound objective? How do I communicate the importance of ocean as well as the value of science? And I think we do the same in business, but from the other perspective. And in our education system, particularly at these levels, I think it's vital that we bring the whole person back together. What got you into this will get you further with the training you have, and we don't do that. So let's do it. It's solvable. It really is solvable.
That is a great point. So we have 4 minutes left, and I feel like there's one topic we haven't hit on, and it was in part because one of our panelists was delayed, and this was her area, but it's so critical, and so somehow I'm going to ask you to talk about social media, in 4 minutes. Not whoever wants to. If you don't want to, then that's fine. We can just call it a day. But that's obviously such a critical picture of this critical part of this picture, our disconnect, and so. Yeah, rather than teeing up a specific question, does anyone want to touch on that briefly?
I love the dead silence. I'm on social media, but so far behind everybody else that I'm probably the wrong person to answer it. But why not use social media to talk about nature more? People watch cat videos, but I'll bet everybody watches beautiful nature videos too. But I have no idea because I'm off the algorithm somewhere.
So look, I'm also mostly off the algorithm, which is bad for my profession. But my first question to that would be, I feel like the algorithm would just say, nature, that's not as exciting it's not going to get people riled up as much as some angry thing. And that's probably a big part of the problem.
That's true.
So.
Yeah.
I just read that children are better at distinguishing different kinds of Pokemons than different animals in nature, which is slightly concerning and might speak to some of the thread of what exactly is clickable and what is interesting and easily engaging young people. So I think there is some kind of challenge there to make it more interesting, to try to distinguish things from nature than Pokemon. Not that there's anything wrong with Pokemon. I'm not studying social media. Do you have? You already mentioned the phone. I actually can I come with one comment to what Deborah said about bringing the person, the human back, and so I'm teaching on a training course for health practitioners, so nurses, so therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, GPs in Australia, because Australia has changed the the law a couple of years ago. So they are allowing MDMA therapy for post-traumatic stress and psilocybin therapy for treatment-resistant depression if the practitioners get a certificate and then get licensed. So we are teaching in that program. So I've been in Australia a couple of times last year. And one of the things that we are teaching these often very experienced mental health practitioners is a bit similar to what you're saying, is actually stripping some of their knowledge and practice of them in order to rebuild them with their humanity and the human presence in these. And that speaks to what I mentioned before about this sensitivity to the context that people are in such a treatment modality. You can come in with all your experience, and you should, because it's important to bring in your mental health practice experience, but strip it somewhat down and be more present, holding space as a human. And even touch, speaking to connection, is built into the model, which is absolutely unheard of in normal mental health. You do not touch your patient, but you do in a very, very, very trained and boundaried way with these. So this connection and human presence is an absolute instrumental part of the model, and even in the training of these therapists who are going to go out and use and implement this modality into mental health space. So it speaks to some of the same as you were saying. I think that's really important.
Oh, did you? No. Okay. Well, we're out of time. This has been a great discussion. I mean, I'll take away, I thought bringing the whole person back together was such a well put way to think about this. Of course, the need to reconnect with nature and not in a transactional way, I also found very profound, and I hope everyone else did as well. Take some of this back to your work and to your thinking and to your lives. So thank you to the panelists, and thank you to the Free Thinking Society for organizing this. Thank you.